Today we're on site filming a latest video essay, Pratten Park in Sydney's inner west in Ashfield. It was once the home of Sydney Olympic during the late 1970s to the mid 1980s. It saw plenty of National Soccer League games, but it also saw one infamous moment that'll go down in history as probably one of the most iconic or infamous matches here at Pratten Park. It happened in 1985. It's now known as the Pratten Park riot. Sydney Olympic were playing Sydney Hakoah one day. Emotions boiled over. More than 300 fans stormed the pitch here in protest of Michael Soper's sending off. Despite being a cricket ground, it hosted Olympic for almost 7 seasons. The club, formed by Greek immigrants in the 1950s, had been floating around multiple venues at the start of the National Soccer League. They played at places like Erskineville and Arlington before they finally found a bit more of a permanent home base here in 1979. Despite relegation from the National Soccer League in the early 1980s, they continued to play here, and they played here till 1985 when this infamous moment happened. A bit of an incident happened. Jerry Gomez went in for a really bad tackle against Michael Soper. Should have been sent off. But yeah, Gomez should have been sent off. Soper is just not going to sit there and take that tackle lying down. He swung out at him. Both players were given a yellow card. Moments later, probably a couple minutes later actually, Soper came in late, dragged his studs down the back of Gomez's leg, and the referee of the day sent him off. Now, when he was being sent off, one of the Olympic players egged on his home crowd, and they stormed the field. About 300 of them stormed the field and tried to assault the referee. And I think they got pretty lucky. I think they tried to assault the Hakoah goalkeeper as well. Pretty crazy scenes. People are running around with corner flags and medical boxes, really trying to attack all the players, the opposition players of Hakoah. Mind you, these two teams, they're not really rivals today, but back in the 1980s, Hakoah, Sydney City, they were the big team in the National Soccer. And they had established a bit of a healthy, maybe not healthy, a bit of a heated rivalry with Olympic. And these matches didn't result in riots and people storming the pitch, but they did result in some pretty ferocious football, some hard tackles, plenty of physicality. Great viewing for the spectators. Now, what was the fallout for an incident like this? Obviously, it picked up a lot of national news. The Premier of the day weighed in on his thoughts. A lot of people wrote into local newspapers. One reckoned they should just ban soccer altogether. Yeah, quite silly, really. But I think the biggest thing is Sydney Olympic was slapped with a $10,000 fine, something that they struggled to pay because they didn't have heaps of money floating around. Remind you, despite being a national competition, these clubs weren't full-time professionals, so they weren't swimming in the big bucks like Melbourne City do. They were also slapped with like a $20,000 suspended sentence, so if they re-offended by the end of the year, they would be slapped with a $30,000 fine altogether, and they may have been crippled altogether. In fact, Olympic's financial situation wasn't that great either, so they're actually facing a lot of uncertainty. The NSL were looking at potentially kicking them out of the competition altogether at the end of the season. Some other fallouts as well is, yeah, they were actually banned from Pratten Park, so you can actually see, I'll flip it around, there's a big fencing around it. Now that's really not going to stop anyone. Anyone could honestly jump that fence. But at the time, there wasn't much of a fence around Pratten Park, and until one was erected, Olympic weren't allowed to play here. So they go play games out at Sydney United's home ground at Pratten Park. They had to go play out at the St George Stadium as well, out at Banksia. And that was a big hit for them because the canteen here made them $2,600 on a match day. And the canteen out at Pratten Park and St George, no, they weren't making that much money as well. So for a club that was struggling to pay back a fine, the loss of one of their biggest incomes was a big detriment. As you can see, it's not a fantastic facility, Pratten Park. To think this place hosted top-level football in the 1980s is quite baffling because it's stuck in the middle of suburban sprawl here in the inner west, and it's pretty hard to park here. I don't know what it was like 40 years ago, but I can't imagine it was much better. Some of the craziest stuff happened was in the fallout over the actual right between the two clubs, Olympic and Hakoah. Like I said, these teams were great rivals at the time, and I'll read off some of the reactions to them. So it's to me it comes across quite pettyish. So we'll start off with the NSL ruled that Olympic was to help police identify offenders who invaded the pitch. Yeah, some of the fallout. The National Soccer League, like I said, ruled that Olympic wasn't allowed to play at Pratten Park until they erected a fence, but also they had to help police identify offenders who invaded the pitch, with all offenders to be banned from football matches for life. Security Olympics games would be doubled for the rest of the season, and even Olympics' future in the NSL would be reviewed at the end of the season. So they were looking at potentially kicking Olympic out of the NSL for what happened here. The fine even almost put Olympic out of business. Their secretary, Tom Demanis, said in the days after the riot, despite the club being heavily in debt, they would actually be able to pay the fine. But really, the club failed to take responsibility for the incident. This guy, Demanis, the secretary at Olympic, he said Sydney City were at as much fault for the riot as Olympic. Check out this quote. The real cause of the trouble was that, over the years, enormous ill feeling had built up against Sydney City. Their physical tackles are something the sport can do without, and spectators do not forget behaviour like that of a Sydney City, or Hakoah, player who once pulled down his pants and bared his backside to the crowd. Now, a response like that is just, it's quite childish. It's saying, oh, you know, people storming the field are like rioting, attacking opposition referees and players. It's like, oh yeah, but what about Sydney City and what they did in the past? It's like, mate, you've got to take full responsibility for that. That's just not acceptable. And so obviously the comments like that from the Olympic secretary brought on a war of words. Sydney City spokesperson Andrew Kearney said Demanis' comments were, quote, really scrapping the bottom of the barrel, end quote. But he didn't miss an opportunity to rip into Olympic. He said, quote, in our opinion, tensions had been building up over the years because of Sydney City's outstanding success. Olympic can't win on the field by playing fairly, so they attempt to win by foul means. It is quite funny when you read through these comments. It's just, you know, I've gone through the old articles on Trove, and it's just back and forth of these people just being real petty. That's kind of the story here of the Pratten Park riot, one of Australia's most infamous moments, at least in off the field, well, technically on the field, but actual unfootball related stuff. Obviously, we saw some pretty horrific scenes down in Melbourne a couple of years ago after the grand final decision. Fallout, saw a lot of protests, a lot of angry people on the field, and as much as I understand their frustration, stuff like this is just not acceptable. Just, no matter how frustrated you are at decisions, no matter the emotions and everything, you cannot run onto the field and do stuff like this. But it's just another interesting story I've found in what is a very big, giant book of Australian football history. Now, if you enjoyed this video, please give us a like, leave some comments on the video, and if you have not already, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. I want to do more videos like this, getting onto the locations, telling stories, and even maybe interviewing some people in the future. So thanks everyone for your support in the past couple of months on the channel. It really means a lot, and we're looking forward to continuing to grow this channel for the later part of 2024 and into 2025.